Day 74. Deuteronomy chapter 11, 12 and 13. Sometimes when people read Deuteronomy, they feel it is full of rules that belong to another time. But if we slow down and listen carefully, we begin to hear something deeper. We begin where Moses says, "But it was your own eyes that saw all these great things the Lord has done." This is more than history, it is a reminder about memory. Faith is often sustained by remembering what God has already done. Many people today struggle spiritually because they forget their own testimonies. They forget the job that came at the right time. They forget the healing that doctors could not explain. They forget the moment when hope returned after a dark season. Moses knew something important. People who forget God's works eventually stop trusting Him. So the first whisper is to never disconnect your present struggles from your past miracles. Your eyes have also seen things God has done. Then we read where Moses describes the land they are about to enter. He says, "The land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven." At first glance, that sounds like a geographical description. But there is a deeper spiritual picture. Egypt, where the Israelites came from, depended on the Nile River. Farmers could control irrigation by human effort. But the Promised Land depended on rain from heaven. In other words, the land would require dependence on God. Sometimes God deliberately leads us into environments where our success depends on Him. You may notice that in certain seasons of life, your plans stop working the way they used to. Your connections do not solve every problem. Your experience is not enough. It can feel frustrating, but often, God is simply moving you from Egypt, where human systems sustain you, into a promised land that requires daily reliance on Him. Mountains and valleys. High seasons and low seasons. But all drinking rain from heaven. Later we read how Moses gives a very practical instruction. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land. Why write God's words on doorframes? Because Moses understood something modern families sometimes forget. Values are transmitted through environment. Children do not only learn from what parents say, they learn from what surrounds them. If a home constantly talks about money, status and competition, those become the child's values. But if a home constantly speaks about integrity, gratitude and reverence for God, those values become part of the child's identity. The doorframe instruction was symbolic. God's word should be visible in daily life, not hidden in occasional religious moments. Many people want spiritually strong children, but the spiritual atmosphere of the home is weak. Moses is teaching that faith should be woven into ordinary life. In conversations at the table. In decisions about money. In how parents treat one another. When God's word surrounds a home, it quietly shapes the next generation. This next whisper is a command that can feel uncomfortable to modern readers. Moses says, "Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every spreading tree, where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods." At first this seems extreme, but the deeper message is about spiritual contamination. God knew that if Israel left those worship places standing, curiosity would eventually lead to compromise. Human beings are deeply influenced by their environment. We may not have physical idols on hills, but we do have subtle influences that compete for our loyalty. Ideas, media, cultural pressures, things that slowly reshape how we think about success, relationships, and even morality. If you want to stay faithful to God, you must intentionally remove influences that constantly pull you away from Him. Spiritual compromise rarely begins with rebellion. It begins with tolerance. Something we allow to remain in our environment slowly shapes our beliefs. But you must not eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water. To us, this may sound like a dietary rule, but behind it is a powerful principle. In biblical thinking, blood represented life. God was teaching Israel to respect life and recognize that it ultimately belongs to Him. In a world where life can be treated casually, whether through violence, exploitation or indifference, this command carries a message that is still relevant. Life is sacred because it belongs to God. Every person you meet carries the breath of life that came from Him. Recognizing that changes how we treat others. Interestingly, Moses also says something that reveals God's practical wisdom. He tells them, "Eat them as you would gazelle or deer. Both the ceremonially unclean and the clean may eat." This instruction shows that God's laws were not designed to create unnecessary hardship. Sometimes people imagine faith as rigid and joyless. But even in ancient laws we see moments of practical flexibility. The deeper lesson is that God understands human life. He does not call people to obedience just to burden them. His instructions are meant to guide life toward health, order, and respect for Him. Then Moses gives a warning that is deeply relevant today. He says, "See that you do all I command you. Do not add to it, or take away from it." This is an incredibly important spiritual principle. People tend to distort truth in two ways. Some add rules that God never required. Others remove the parts that challenge them. Both distortions lead to confusion. True obedience is not about inventing new spiritual standards, or editing God's instructions to fit our comfort. It is about faithfully living what God has already said. Many spiritual conflicts today come from this tension. When people begin adding human traditions as if they were divine commands, faith becomes heavy and legalistic. When people begin removing difficult truths, faith becomes empty and powerless. God calls us to something simpler. Listen carefully. Obey faithfully. One of these chapters talks about investigating wrongdoing. Moses says you must inquire, probe, and investigate it thoroughly. This instruction reveals something important about God's character. Justice must be careful and truthful, not impulsive. Rumors, assumptions, and emotional reactions are dangerous. Even today, communities can be damaged by accusations that were never properly examined. God's instruction here teaches the importance of seeking truth before judgment. It encourages patience, wisdom, and responsibility. Finally, Moses ends with a promise that reveals the heart of God. He says that when the people remain faithful, the Lord will turn from His fierce anger, will show you mercy, and will have compassion on you. He will increase your numbers as He promised on oath to your ancestors. This is the tone that runs through all these chapters. Yes, there are warnings, yes, there are commands. But underneath it all is God's desire to bless, protect, and sustain His people. Obedience is not about control, it is about alignment. When our lives align with God's wisdom, we step into the kind of life He designed. A life shaped by integrity, a life protected from destructive influences, a life connected to the source of true blessing. For anyone seeking God today, remember what He has already done. Accept seasons that require dependence on Him. Create environments that nurture faith. Remove influences that slowly pull you away. Respect the life God has given, seek truth carefully, and above all, walk faithfully in what God has revealed, because the same promise still echoes through time. When people seek Him sincerely, God responds with mercy, compassion, and guidance for the future. And just like the land Moses described, our lives, with all their mountains and valleys, can still drink rain from heaven.